Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. I am Dr. Areed Siddiqui and today we are going to have a look at various international commercial terms. When we say international commercial terms, they are commonly understood as Incoterms or delivery terms. The latest revision of Incoterms is 2020. When we talk about Incoterms, a very important thing which we should keep in mind is that these Incoterms are same across the globe and they clearly define the division of risk and cost between the seller and the buyer. In total, the International Chamber of Commerce has provided 11 Incoterms. These 11 Incoterms have been divided into four broad categories. These four categories again specify the division of risk and cost between the buyer and the seller, and hence the 11 Incoterms which we are going to understand today are ex works, free alongside, free carrier, free on board, carriage paid to, carriage and insurance paid to, delivered at place unloaded, delivered duty paid, carriage insurance and freight, and carriage and freight. So in total, there are 11 Incoterms which we are going to analyze, understand and individually examine and see their role in smooth functioning of international trade. So friends, let us begin with the presentation now. Incoterms, as we have just understood from the introduction, have been given by International Chambers of Commerce. The International Chambers of Commerce first gave its Incoterms in 1936, after which these Incoterms have been continuously revised, and the latest Incoterms applicable are Incoterms 2020. One thing we should always keep in mind is that it is always beneficial to use the latest revision of Incoterms, because as Incoterms are not laws, they are simple rules. It is between the exporter and the importer to decide upon the Incoterm applicable in the contract. Whenever we want to read about the Incoterms, we should always prefer to analyze and understand them from the website of International Chambers of Commerce. These Incoterms are self-contained and entire information is available on the website of International Chambers of Commerce. The Incoterms that we are going to see today are broadly used in a contract and they become enforceable by law only when it is a part of the contract. These Incoterms help us in avoiding any kind of misunderstandings and dividing the cost and risk between the exporter and the importer in an international sales transaction. Apart from the buyer and the seller, it is the banks, the insurance companies and the carrying and forwarding agents which use these Incoterms. Incoterms basically are used by banks in terms of presenting or negotiation of documents and realizing payment by the exporter. Incoterms are used by insurers in order to give the claim in case of loss of damage to the goods by the insurance agencies to either the exporter or the importer. While Incoterms help us in understanding the handling requirements between the carrying and the forwarding agents. These carrying and forwarding agents are mainly appointed by either the exporter or the importer, and hence this Incoterm helps in conveying to the forwarders that how to handle the goods, till what point do we handle the goods, whether it is the exporter or the importer. Before we begin with the Incoterms, one very important thing that we should understand is the definition of delivery. Incoterms 2020 have clearly defined delivery as a point where transfer of risk and cost moves from the seller to the buyer. It is basically an indication of risk of loss or damage and which party is responsible for that risk or loss. It does not mean, or delivery does not mean, that goods have reached the customer or goods have entered the buyer's country. Delivery can happen as per Incoterms anywhere in the seller or the buyer's country. So another important definition that we need to understand before we move towards Incoterms is the definition related to transportation. Definition of pre-carriage, definition of main carriage and on carriage. ICC gives these three parts, these three legs of transportation to understand an Incoterm effectively. When we say pre-carriage, it is mainly movement of goods within the exporter's country. When we talk about on carriage, it is mainly movement of goods within the importer's country. When we say main carriage, this is the most important part of a contract of an Incoterm because it is during the main carriage stage that goods are moving from one country to another. Neither the exporter nor the importer has any hold, has any kind of role in terms of handling, managing, ensuring the goods during the main carriage stage, as they are completely at the discretion of the carrier. They are handed over to a third party. So these Incoterms become very important when we talk about the main carriage stage. Each of these 11 Incoterms that we talk about basically tell us the transfer of risk and cost before or after the main carriage stage, primarily to make either of the parties responsible for movement of goods from one country to another. When we negotiate terms in international trade, we may use terms like door to port to port, or port to door. When we see these, port does not specifically mean seaport. Port can be an airport, port can be a land port, or port can be a seaport. So movement of goods from one country to another, whether it includes pre-carriage, main carriage or on carriage or all three of them, can be broadly defined as door to port to port or port to door. Another important point before we begin with Incoterms is the division of these Incoterms based on the mode of transportation. The mode of transportation at the main carriage stage primarily. Whether these Incoterms are omnimodal or marine restricted. As we all know, omnimodal basically means that these Incoterms can be used across all modes of transport. That means whether goods go by sea, whether goods go by air, or whether goods go by road. Movement of goods from one point to another, whatever be the mode of transport, we may say that omnimodal Incoterms are applicable. Whereas marine restricted Incoterms are applicable only when goods go by sea. Incoterms specifically do not talk about packaging. Incoterms say that packaging of the goods should be such that they are fit for transportation. They do not give any specific means of packing or stowage of the goods on a container or on a vessel or on any other carrier. The important points which an Incoterm basically governs or makes clear between the two parties is that which party here means buyer or seller, that means either the exporter or the importer, which party is responsible for packaging the goods, which party is responsible for pre-carriage. Responsible means bear the risk and bear the cost. Which party is responsible for on carriage, which party is responsible for main carriage, which party is responsible for custom clearance of the goods for export, which party is responsible for arranging any kind of insurance, which party is responsible for import clearance, which party is responsible for payment of import duties, and which party is responsible for preparing any other handling requirements either at the exporter's port or the importer's port. So friends, if you see here, Incoterms are basically dividing the risk and cost in terms of physical movement of the goods from one country to another. They do not talk about realization of payment. They do not talk about change of ownership. Incoterms are also not automatically applicable. It has to be specifically mentioned that an Incoterm is applicable to a transaction. Otherwise, it cannot be taken by default that whenever we are trading globally, an Incoterm would be applicable. If you see here, you can see the comparison between Incoterms 2010 and Incoterms 2020. If you see here, in total there are 11 Incoterms. The green colored ones are omnimodal and the blue colored ones are marine restricted. So if you see here, there are 7 omnimodal Incoterms and 4 marine restricted Incoterms. And you see the only difference between Incoterms 2010 to Incoterms 2020 is in a D category Incoterm. Delivered at terminal has been transformed into delivered at place unloaded. These 11 Incoterms, if you see in ascending order, from Ex Works to delivered duty paid, we can see that the risk and cost which is borne by the exporter goes on increasing and that of the buyer goes on decreasing. So it depends from transaction to transaction that which Incoterm would be applicable. In a transaction, we can at the most apply one Incoterm because this is what brings clarity to movement of the goods. So as we move from Ex Works to DDP, we will see how the risk and cost of the seller goes on increasing and that of the buyer goes on decreasing. One very important thing before we begin with each of the Incoterms is that these Incoterms play an important role in terms of pricing. Higher the risk, higher the cost borne by a particular party, higher would be the invoice value. So if an exporter is willing to deliver DDP, then he will be willing to or he will be charging a higher price as compared to an Ex Works transaction. It's not only movement of goods but also pricing which may be impacted when we apply an Incoterm. Let us see each Incoterm in detail now, beginning with omnimodal Incoterms. The first Incoterm that we talk about is Ex Works. If you see here, against Ex Works, a named place in brackets is indicated. This named place basically is the point where transfer of risk and cost takes place from the seller to the buyer. Ex Works is the simplest of all Incoterms. It basically means that the exporter, the seller, bears the risk and cost of manufacturing and packaging the goods and placing the goods at the disposal of the buyer. Now it is the responsibility of the buyer to arrange for export clearance, to arrange for pre-carriage, main carriage, on carriage and import clearance. If you see here, Ex Works can only be applied when the importer is well averse with the regulatory requirements in the exporter's country. So if you see, we see the next Incoterm as we move ahead. The next Incoterm is free carrier. Free carrier basically means that the seller is responsible for manufacturing the goods, packaging the goods and also arranging for export clearance. The seller is responsible to bear the risk and cost of delivering the goods at a named place but within the exporter's country. FCA is a very versatile Incoterm because this named place can be anywhere in the seller's country. It can be a land port, it can be a midpoint, it can be a seaport. It depends upon the transaction, it depends upon the two parties that where is this named place. Moving ahead, if we see, the next category of Incoterm comes into the picture, which is carriage paid to, CPT. Now if you see the named place, it is clearly mentioned. The named place is in the buyer's country. If we have to define CPT, what do we say? The seller is responsible for bearing the cost till the goods reach the buyer's country. But The risk is limited till the time the goods reach the port in the or the place of delivery in the seller's country. When we say cost, cost here includes pre-carriage and main carriage and cost of clearance. But the risk, if you see, does not move together with the cost in case of CPT. The risk ends in the seller's country, but the cost extends up to the buyer's country. An improvisation over CPT is CIP. Why do I say it's an improvisation? It is an improvisation because the risk open to the buyer is magnanimous in case of CPT. Because the seller was responsible to bear the risk only till the point the goods reach the place of dispatch, point of dispatch in the exporter's country. From that point onwards, it was open for risk for the importer. So in CIP, what happens is the seller is responsible to take an insurance cover right from the time the goods are dispatched up to the time the goods reach the buyer's country. So CIP, the seller is responsible for bearing the cost of carriage and insurance till the time the goods are delivered in the buyer's country. Next, if you see, you have a D term, delivered at place unloaded. This is the term which has replaced delivered at terminal in Incoterms 2010. Here, if you see, the seller is responsible for delivering the goods up to the buyer's country and also unloading them. So if you see, it is mainly loading, unloading and transportation which is important here. One more very important thing which you must have seen across the slides is that it is mentioned insurance not covered. It's only two Incoterms, CIP and CIF, which include insurance cover. Otherwise, in all the remaining 9 Incoterms, insurance has to be separately taken by the seller or the buyer as determined in the contract. Next Incoterm that we talk about is delivered at place. Now in case of delivered at place, the seller delivers the goods to the buyer at the named place, but the goods are not unloaded. The seller handles the export clearance and the buyer handles the import clearance. The last omni-modal Incoterm which we talk about is delivered duty paid. This is the opposite of Ex Works. Like in Ex Works, the buyer was responsible to collect the goods from the seller's premise. In DDP, the seller is responsible to deliver the goods up to the buyer's premise. So 7 omni-modal Incoterms done. Let us move to marine restricted Incoterms. The first marine restricted Incoterm that we talk about is free alongside the ship, FAS. This Incoterm usually is not preferred as the seller is responsible for placing the goods next to the vessel. The seller has no interest, no risk, no cost involved in ensuring that goods are loaded onto the vessel. The buyer being in another country faces a huge amount of risk in case there is any delay, in case there is any mishap when we talk about loading of the goods onto the main carrier, that is the ship in this case, because it is marine restricted. So an improvisation over FAS is FOB, free on board. This is the most commonly used Incoterm, most commonly understood Incoterm because it is the one which has been used globally to a maximum extent, at least in negotiations. We cannot say in contracts, but in negotiation definitely. So when we say FOB, seller is responsible to place the goods on board the vessel in his country. That means a named place in the seller's country, placing the goods on board the vessel. The seller handles export clearance and the buyer handles import clearance. The next Incoterm, a C category Incoterm which is marine restricted, is cost and freight. Now if you see here, the named place is a port in the buyer's country. The seller is now responsible to bear the cost and freight till the time the goods reach the buyer's country, but the seller is responsible to bear the risk only till the time the goods are loaded onto the vessel. So if you see here, just like CPT, we have CFR, where there is a mismatch of risk and cost. But what is the difference between the two? In CPT, the seller was responsible to deliver the goods at the port, but here the seller is responsible to load the goods onto the vessel and bear the cost till the goods reach a named port in the buyer's country. The last Incoterm that we talk about is Cost, Insurance and Freight, CIF. Cost, Insurance and Freight, just like CIP, is an improvisation over CFR, but it is marine restricted. In Cost, Insurance and Freight, the seller is responsible to deliver the goods up to a named port in the buyer's country and also insure the goods. Insurance is also taken by the seller. The cost of insurance, the risk which is borne by the importer, the insurance for that risk is covered by the exporter. So we have seen all 11 Incoterms, 7 omnimodal and 4 marine restricted Incoterms. After seeing these 11 Incoterms, we can clearly understand that the 4 broad categories, which are E, F, C and D, we can see here the E and F category Incoterms indicate the place of delivery to be the place in the seller's country. Whereas in case of C and D category Incoterms, the place of delivery is in the buyer's country. The only thing that we should keep in mind is while using these Incoterms, we should have clarity. We should understand what is the mode of transport, what is the requirement of the buyer. There is no generalization as such in terms of which Incoterm will be used for which product or for which country. An Incoterm is specifically decided only between the seller and the buyer. It has to be completely in tandem with your product, the infrastructural facilities and the terms of trade. The Incoterms should not be contradictory. That means contradictory with other terms specifically like payment. You all must have seen various methods of payment. If supposingly there is an advance payment, it does not make any rationale to use DDP. Because what happens in advance payment? The seller gets the payment in advance. Then why will he invest his time, his cost in terms of a DDP transaction? So there should not be a stark difference, a stark irrationalization between choice of various terms of trade. The Incoterm should be in line with your terms of trade, your contract, your payment term, and hence that will make it an effective transaction. In these Incoterms, you must have also seen that Incoterms indicate specifically handling of the goods. Incoterms indicate specifically loading and unloading. Major emphasis has been given on loading and unloading. Though it may seem that loading and unloading is nothing important or a minimal task in trade, but it is this point where maximum loss occurs to the goods in terms of damage. The handling of the goods is very, very important. And this is what Incoterms 2020 has specified upon the place, the point where unloading is done, which party is responsible for unloading. Such minimum minute things should be paid utmost attention to whenever we talk about Incoterms. You can see snapshots of Incoterms on the website of ICC, which will help you in understanding them in detail. Keep a track of the website of ICC because they may get updated. But as they have been revised recently in 2020, it would be some more time before they are revised again. As I must have already stated, I am re-emphasizing that only one Incoterm can be used in a transaction. You cannot have more than one Incoterm because the place of delivery is only one. And before we wind up, I am going to re-emphasize that delivery here does not mean change of ownership. It only means change of custody. It only means change of risk or cost. It only means change of handling. It only means bearing the cost and the responsibility of various regulatory clearances between the two parties. An Incoterm is specifically decided only between the exporter and the importer. When we say exporter or the importer, whichever Incoterm is decided, these Incoterms become binding on their intermediaries. They may appoint various intermediaries to facilitate trade, and hence they may be used by them too. So friends, after today's session, I am very sure that the key points that we have understood are that how to apply these 11 Incoterms in a contract, in which kind of mode of transport specifically for main carriage do we use which Incoterm, and once we have decided the Incoterm, how do we analyze or understand the role of various intermediaries and use them in terms of realizing our payment and movement of goods from one country to another. We must have also understood how to handle the goods while we are using an Incoterm, whether it's the responsibility of the seller or that of the buyer. I'm very sure that after today's session, you all will be able to apply and utilize this knowledge in order to excel in your export or import trade effectively, and I wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. Thank you, and we are always there at IFT to help you.